Neil, welcome, and thank you for doing whatever it's taking on a Sunday night in India on your part to be with us.
Well, I'm really thrilled to be here again. Really apologize for showing up late, but looking forward to the conversation.
So maybe my first question, sort of starting off in the present. Can you say, for those who may not be familiar with Awaz Day, what is this business that you've started in India? Tell us a little bit about the purpose, the business model, and the service that you're offering people.
Sure. So just by way of context about the business and what brought me to India, from the U.S., I was born and raised in California in the U.S. and have a technology background. So I studied computer science in college and then went to graduate school for computer science. And my goal in graduate school, my research goal was to apply my technical skills towards underserved communities to bring the benefits of information technology to those who may otherwise not have access for various reasons, socioeconomic reasons, literacy reasons, other kinds of barriers. So that was my reason for going into graduate school, to try to extend the benefits of computing technology to those who may not have access, and that brought me to India. And in India, I started working with farmers, primarily agricultural communities where smallholder farmers in India struggle to get access to all kinds of advice and information that may help them in making a more productive farming operation. So we developed some simple tools and techniques using mobile phones for farmers to be able to not only get access to information from experts, but to connect to one another through the medium of voice to be able to share agricultural advice. And this was all done through voice because it allowed us to overcome language barriers, literacy barriers, and connectivity barriers all at once, where you didn't even need to have internet access to be able to share or listen to a voice message recorded by another farmer on how to deal with a particular disease or pest. You could simply dial a phone number and hear the message. And you could also reply by recording your own voice. So that simple idea of using automated voice-driven user interface accessible through phone number was the basic idea for my thesis project, which was around connecting farmers for rural information access. And that research project was pretty successful. We ended up writing a bunch of papers and influencing a lot of future research. But in that process, we realized that there was an opportunity to provide this sort of technology more broadly for many organizations, and not just in agriculture, but in health and education and labor and financial literacy, all different segments of development. So that's where we saw an opportunity to start a business, an organization where we can provide these services more broadly. And that was Awaz Day. So it essentially spun out of my research work that I was doing as a student.
So Neil, I want to go back to something you said very early on, which was that when you went to graduate school, you got your PhD from Stanford, right?
Yes.
And you wanted to get your PhD from Stanford in order to bring technology to serve underserved communities. Well, that's not a typical thing that people who go to Stanford to get their PhD want to do. So, how did you get wired to want to do that with your Stanford PhD?
I guess there's so many different confluencing events and exposures and experiences that have led me there. To say a few probably that were the most influential. First, I would say an early engagement and interest in service and in spirituality, starting with my parents, but then also very much influenced by service space and at that time charity focus. When I was a teenager, I was exposed to service space and getting in touch with very kind-hearted people who saw service as a way of living. Early life exposure to service and to thinking about giving beyond your own sort of particular selfish needs, but to have a life where you're orienting around others. So I think early influences around service and spirituality, and then more as I got older, influenced by people who ended up becoming mentors in my research work. So Tapan Parikh, in particular, was a researcher before me, sort of a generation before me, who, while he was a student at University of Washington, really pioneered this kind of idea of PhD students in computer science in world-class institutions around the US going to India and doing work in rural communities. He was really one of the first people, if not the first, to do it. So Tap is just someone that's also known in the service-based community. I came to know about his work just through school and through various sort of just exposure. I watched a lecture, or I read a paper of his, and I just got inspired by him and contacted him one day and said, I want to do what you're doing. And at that time I was applying to graduate school, and he said, that's great, get into graduate school and maybe we can work together. And he ended up taking a faculty job at Berkeley as the year right after I started at Stanford. So it worked out, and he ended up being my PhD advisor. And so that was really the seed for us to go in this direction. Tap is the co-founder of Awazde as well.
So it was service-based, and I believe you met Nipun early on when you were a teenager as well, and then this other mentor. So it was people you met who sort of opened up for you the value that you have inside yourself of service. Yeah.
Definitely. I think the seeds are planted by so many different people in many different ways.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the group for the group interview. So to ask you this, okay, so here's the question. You've got Awazde, and you're serving rural farmers to help them connect to the world to help, through voice, and help them connect to the internet in that way. And then, as I understand it, this is also a business where you bring in income and you support yourself. So it's a wonderful example in a right livelihood conversation of both the right and the livelihood part. Mm-hmm. So can you share with us the business model of how this works and how you actually earn a livelihood doing this?
Yeah, sure. So you had asked that earlier. I missed that part. Awazde is a registered private limited company in India. So it's like a for-profit business, but registered in India. Our idea is to self-sustain and grow the organization in our work through our own revenue, through our own earnings, and through our own profit. So we want to be self-sustaining financially. We want to basically, and we have been orienting ourselves as basically a technology startup, but with this bent towards a social mission, very much focusing on that kind of work. So the way we earn money is just like any other B2B enterprise SaaS business, because what we deliver as a product is enterprise SaaS software, is we charge users to use our platform. So if you click to up onto the technology tab, there is a subsection called Messenger. I don't know if we have the link up. We actually just launched this new product. I think maybe the sign up button is not working, but basically we have products that allow organizations to effectively and efficiently reach out to hard to reach communities through voice messaging and various other things. And those organizations pay for the ability to use that software. I think the closest analog is MailChimp. I think many of you are familiar with MailChimp, which is an email marketing software where you create a MailChimp account and then you pay to send hundreds or thousands of emails to people. Similarly, we have a MailChimp for voice messaging where you can create a Awazde account, upload your contacts, create lists, and create campaigns, and send voice messages to dozens or hundreds or thousands of people and you pay per message. You pay for the airtime, and we take some revenue from that. So that's the basic model. On top of that, we do a lot of work around the technology. So what really separates our business is that we don't just deliver the platform. If an organization just needed the platform, then they could certainly just use it. But most organizations, particularly in the sector that we work, have gaps in their capacity at many places. They may not have the technology, but they also may not have the capacity to design the intervention, to create the content, to analyze the data. Once you send a message to 10,000 people, what is the actual engagement level? What is the response? What is the impact? So those are things that organizations ultimately want to measure. They don't just want to send messages, they want to create impact. So there's many different things beyond just sending communication or getting folks to pick up a phone that go into creating real value. So Awaze is set up as sort of a consultancy product hybrid kind of company. And we charge for our consultancy services. We charge for content development. We do content development in-house, along with selling our platform. We do data analysis. We go into the field and do end user research to design intervention. So we kind of provide this end-to-end solution. And organizations like governments, NGOs, foundations, various types of organizations that are trying to reach out to the last mile. More and more, we're working with commercial organizations. Our big push in the last year and a half has been to work with financial institutions that are now, especially in India, trying to expand to the unbanked and underbanked populations to provide financial services to those who would need. And so a big component of delivering financial services is financial literacy. So you don't want to just give a person a loan, you want to educate a person about what a loan is, the consequences of taking the loan, and how to properly make sure that your credit history doesn't get damaged, and have proper behavior around those financial tools. So we do a lot of work now with banks. We work with many of the mainstream banks in India who are now trying to get into inclusive banking and rural banking. And then we work with this industry known as microfinance, which is historically the industry that tries to reach out to underserved people with financial services.
Yeah. Well, isn't this an interesting story of combining both the service with, obviously, a very advanced business plan and technology and services. It's a beautiful beautiful weaving of the two, Neil. A great example, I think, of doing what we've been talking about in this circle of combining the purpose and the business. So I want to open this up for our group informational interview for any of you who have the next question. I see that Zhao is no longer with us. I hope she comes back. So Nandini or Setsuku or Fesh. Okay, Nandini, looks like you've got a question. Go ahead. Oh, and then after you is Fesh. Okay, yeah.
Hi, Neil. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And I guess I was wondering, from your perspective, I mean, it sounds, your work sounds like Arya was saying, like a great balance of the right part and the livelihood part. But I'm wondering if in your own personal experience, if you see it that way, and if there's maybe one component that feels more than the other, or if you see it as evenly balanced, and kind of where you see your own personal journey with trying to find that balance.
A really good question. I think it's a question that I could ponder for a while. We don't have that much time, so I'll share what is coming up. The reason I feel it's a very deep question is because if I think about where this journey started with this organization and where we're at now, there's been a number of decisions and also compromises that we've made along the way to be able to create this balance. And I can remember a couple of particular anecdotes that maybe get at what you're asking, and that illustrate to me the kinds of the kind of balancing act that we've tried to play over time. So one simple example is, our platform is really powerful because you can reach a lot of people very effectively. Effectively meaning, if you're just sending voice messages over dialed phone numbers, you have a pretty high probability that you're going to reach a lot of people. You don't assume that the person has internet. You don't assume that that person has even a mobile phone. They could even be calling. You could even be calling people on a landline phone. So it's very low common denominator technology. So this is very attractive to people who want to just reach out to the masses. I remember about maybe now 4 years ago, we were approached by one of the largest, probably the largest at this point, political parties in India. And they were interested in using our platform to send politically oriented messages to large groups of like millions of people across India around their campaigning for votes, essentially. We internally had a decision to consider. We had never really got into this work to get involved politically. And we also weren't sure whether, as a result, we weren't really sure whether a kind of a political use case fit our mission. And our mission has always been to empower people with information that helps them in their own lives and to bring about social change in that way through this lens of empowerment. Ultimately, we decided that a political campaign like the one that we were asked to do was benefiting the political party a lot more than it was benefiting the constituents. Meaning, we felt that the messages that were going to be sent, the people who were receiving them probably weren't interested or may not have been particularly interested in being called by this political party, but because they're trying to garner votes, they're getting this message. So it's more like about a coercion or a persuasion than it was about genuinely doing something in the interest of those people who are receiving the message. So we always thought about, we asked ourselves, is this really in the interest of the receiver? Of course, we're getting paid by the political party, so there's this tension, right? So whether that person is benefiting or not, we would benefit because we get paid, right? But for us, it's not about whether we get paid or not, it's whether that end user benefits. So in that case, we decided not to, and we have now a policy that we don't do political campaigns.
A good example of choosing the right above the livelihood in that situation. Yeah.
Another example that's a little bit more recent is Facebook. Facebook, maybe about a year and a half ago, had this big move to offer this service called Free Basics. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this, but they wanted to come into India and offer Facebook, just Facebook for free to Indian mobile users. So it was a way so what Facebook thought was that this was a great way to get people connected to the internet. They have access where they previously would not because they wouldn't have to pay for it. And people would ultimately benefit because they would have access to the internet. But there's an important distinction between the internet and Facebook. They weren't giving free access to the internet. They were giving just free access to Facebook and a particular bundle of services around Facebook. So, of course, on one hand, it benefits people to get access to Facebook. Maybe that's arguable. But on the other hand, it was also, in a way, a business move for Facebook to be able to capture an audience that maybe they otherwise would not, but because they're sort of offering it at free, they would be able to. So it was a question of, so the government of India had a long debate about whether this was to be allowed or not. At Awaz Day, we were invited by Facebook to offer services as part of this bundle. So we had an opportunity to participate to be one of these preferred providers that would be offered along with this Facebook basic package. And again, we had a similar debate internally. This one became a question of, there's a lot of particular issues around net neutrality and other things that kind of come into play here. But ultimately, where again we had an opportunity to kind of align with a large commercial organization and have a type of an exposure and reach that we otherwise may not have been able to, decided that it again wasn't really in the best interest of users to lock them into Facebook. Because that's not really the internet, and there may be ulterior motives down the line that we may not align with if people are locked in that way. We thought of it basically this way. If Facebook was offering people free credit to get onto the internet, and people could choose whether they use Facebook, but also they could use the internet time to do anything else that they would like to do on the internet, that would be something that would be much more aligned, because that's giving access in a sort of a more democratized way. But as soon as you say, okay, you have access to certain things on the internet and you don't have access to certain other things, that ultimately opens up the possibility for, biases of various types. So we didn't want to participate in that.
Good example. Thank you, Neil. Being clear on your purpose of being in business, a great example. Fash, you have your hand up here, so you are next.
Okay, thank you. Neil, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, I heard a lot, even from the answer you just gave right now. Because Free Basic is in Nigeria, and I'm one of the people that thinks this is not correct, because the people that use it are unable to access, for example, Google, and other things that is actually the internet rather than just Facebook and other services. Okay, so my question is around your work. So I work presently in a rural community in Nigeria in education, and definitely I'm fascinated by what you do, and I just want to learn a little bit more about. So are you, for example, like a telecommunication company? Because in Nigeria, there are telecommunication, companies. So are you telecommunication companies, or you partner with telecommunication companies? How do you generate numbers for people? Well, maybe these are technical questions, or maybe it's something you could really share, because I'm just trying to imagine how all of this connects, into how you actually connect with these people in these communities. This is my first question. My second question has to do with livelihood and goes around the question that Police had. Now, for the companies that come on board and wants to use your service, do you have a way of really showing them that this is beyond business? Yeah, you give an example of a political party and all of that, but I understand as well that there are big companies, banks and all of that, that are not really bothered about empowering people. They need to make money. I mean, these guys have targets every month. They have targets every week. They need to make money. They don't bother if people are really fine or they are not. I mean, these guys give interest that interest that are just crazy for people that live in communities like the places where I work. So how do you kind of show these guys that what you're doing is beyond just the money, and that them coming on board on your platform, they need to have a kind of mindset? I know that maybe you got the question I'm trying to ask.
Yeah. I see him nodding. Yeah. Good question.
All really excellent questions. And I think this sort of fashion questions sort of open up. I think I want to share even the two examples I gave are sort of a little bit more, I would say, kind of like maybe a little bit more black and white with not as much gray area. I want to share a couple of examples with more subtlety and more gray area. And I think it's related to what Fash is asking. So, but your first questions were around the business. We are not a telecom company, but we built our service on top of the telco operators. So again, going back to like the MailChimp example, you use Awaze to send voice messages and manage your contacts and do reports and do data analysis. The phone calling is actually done through our system connected to the telco operator. So we connect through, industrial telephony infrastructure to be able to send massive amounts of calls. But we are essentially a customer of the telcos. So we pay a huge phone bill every month to send phone calls. But we are ourselves not a telecom operator. How do we get the phone numbers? Again, going back to the MailChimp example, When you want to send an email campaign on MailChimp, MailChimp doesn't have the email addresses there for you. You have to upload them onto the platform and create your own contact list. So similarly, Avaze does not have, does not provide contact lists readily available to the organization. They bring their own contact list. So for example, if you're an agricultural NGO and you have a network of 10,000 farmers that you are working with to improve their coffee farms, you have collected in some way, somehow you've collected the phone numbers of those 10,000 farmers. Only then are you able to actually use Avaze. If you don't have the phone numbers, you can't use Avaze because you don't share the phone numbers with others. So I hope that kind of gives a sense for how it works. In terms of your other sets of questions around how do you know, or at least the way I interpreted your question was, how do you align with organizations that you feel are going to be doing work that's aligned, that you find wholesome, that you find aligned, that you find right? And that is a really tough question that we don't have the answer to. We don't have a good answer to. And it's something that we've just been evolving over time. But honestly, we don't, it's a very subjective judgment. Even at this stage, as an organization, we've been around for 6 years, we vet each and every organization we work with. And we have discussions around whether we feel aligned with this organization. We're moving now into financial services. So we're working with banks, we're working with microfinance institutions. And microfinance is an industry in India that has been much maligned for doing sort of, for misbehaving and for exploiting people to try to increase numbers to get more people on loans. They oversubscribe people. There's been cases in India where people commit suicide out of, from being in debt. People take on 10, 15, 20 loans because microfinance, some organizations are very predatory and very aggressive in pushing these sort of products. So there is, now we're, especially because we're pivoting heavily into this work, this question. The way that we do it right now is, as I said, we approach an institution, we typically approach institutions in the financial inclusion space that we've already vetted. We try to understand their work, but then we have basically meetings. We talk with those organizations, we talk with the leadership, we understand how they view their work. We go to the field, we look at what they're doing on the ground, we talk to the people that they're working with, and we basically evaluate our customers. It's much more work, it's not very scalable, but for us, it's very important for us to, at the end of the day, feel confident that our platform is being used for a purpose that we feel aligned with. Now, there's all of these, subjective questions around, for example, financial services in general. Is it a good idea to give people loans? Is it a good idea to give people, certain financial means? Should we be encouraging people to participate in the financial system? So those are questions that we haven't really touched, I would say for sure. At this point, what we feel is that based on our work in microfinance, we do feel that people are generating value from the financial services. We talk to microfinance borrowers. We feel that it is actually helping them in their lives. So we feel that based on those anecdotes and based on data that we collect from organizations, it's moving in a positive direction. But let me give you an example of a sort of a subtle thing that we recently discussed. Even this, just an innocuous thing of delivering, one thing that we do with financial institutions is we deliver reminders or confirmations of payments of a loan. So a loan borrower, typically it's a woman in a village who is not literate. And sometimes that woman borrower, the female borrower, doesn't own the phone in her home. It's owned by the male or kept by the male head of the household. So one issue that came up recently was we came to know that some of the borrowers, some of the ladies expressed a little bit of concern of getting an automated phone call that says, hello, X, thank you we have received your loan payment of Y, your balance is Z. the reason that they were concerned is because if the male person in their household picks up the phone and hears that this female family member has taken a loan, there are some cases where the male family member doesn't know. Sometimes the female family member is taking a loan for themselves or for something that they have kept the husband out of it or kept the male out of it. And this could create some problems in the family or in the household if the male picked up and got that call. So this was something that, like, you can say, oh, you know, is this going to actually happen? This is a scenario. But it's an example of something that we took really seriously and considered, are we doing harm by sending something as innocuous as a phone call to remind someone or confirm with someone that they made a loan payment?
A lot of nuances that have to go on,
exactly.
obviously, to managing all these relationships.
And you know, what we're finding is that it's going to be impossible to say for sure. Like, we're moving into murky territory where it's even unclear whether there is positive impact. There's probably positive and there's negative. I don't really have a good answer. I'm actually sorry to say, like, I don't feel like we have anything that's really solid, other than we go with our gut and we've just had a lot of experience over the years. And we've said no to a lot of organizations. We mostly say no. So we feel like the organizations that we work with are pretty relatively solid.
So I want to move on so others can also have a chance to ask you a question. I have the feeling, Neil, that there may be more that that Fash or others might want to talk with you about. We didn't discuss this beforehand, but would you be open to people who might want to follow up with you privately to contact you by email for further, you know, further exploration? Because that would be good.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a very, I'm sharing a lot. I think there's so much to learn from all of you. So I would love to connect with all of you.
Okay, that's great. Just wanted to ask your permission. Okay, so Setsuko, have you got a question for Neil?
Thank you. Nice to meet you. No, it's the same thing. It struck me with this different value, different intention of doing business. So it's the same. Maybe the fact that you are doing this business as you do now is already the effect. But I just want to maybe ask, would you think about to manifest to the world, you know, that this kind of way of doing business is possible, like to show a difference, to impact basically in the business world?
I did. Oh, Neil, you've muted yourself. Setsuko, I didn't quite understand your question. Can you say it again? I want to make sure that, you know, all of us understand it.
Oh, okay. I think the fact that you are doing this business is already doing that to influence to others, but I just wonder to make an impact to the business world, which whose standard is basically to do anything and everything to make more money. So some kind of awareness raising, or do even beyond doing the business in itself.
So you're talking about using this as an educational opportunity for businesses
to change the world. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for catching the mute. Yeah, Setsuko, such an important question, and it's actually it's very coincidental that you asked that question. Just yesterday, we had a day-long offsite with the entire team where we had our yearly strategy meeting, and we basically spent the entire day planning out our strategy for the next year. And in one of the side conversations I had with one of our teammates, I was talking about this for-profit versus non-profit distinction, and he was actually interested in why Alazde ended up choosing to be registered itself as a for-profit company. And I told him that it wasn't really actually a deliberate choice I made. It was basically the requirement that I needed to fulfill to start the business, because we were getting investment from a institution in India that required us to be a private limited company. That was the only reason. If we were to have gotten seed capital from a foundation that said you had to register as a nonprofit, we would have done that as well. So I didn't really pay much mind to the structure of the organization. What was important to me was the mission and the way we carried out the work. So that, I think, as you said, Tatuku, is very, very unique about what we're doing. And what I told my teammate was, part of why we exist as an organization is to provide a model for how to do business that's different than either pure nonprofit or pure for-profit. There's an entire spectrum in the middle that doesn't really get recognized, and it's a very amorphous. It's very unclear what kinds of organizations can sit there. But we definitely want to sit there. We want to be in the middle, because the middle is actually where all the action is at. And that even though sometimes it is actually to our detriment to not say we're a pure for-profit or a pure nonprofit, it's important for us as an organization to set some sort of bar, to put a stake in the ground and say an organization can be for impact or have a mission for some sort of social good, but still be a profitable business and to grow and to sustain on its own profit. So you're absolutely right. I mean, we do think about how we are a model, and we do feel like others have stood on our shoulders. In terms of what we've done to really promote it, I would say we've not done much. We're so resource constrained. We're just trying to survive ourselves, to be honest. But wherever we can, we try. So one thing is in India, in particular, in the city that we're based is in Ahmedabad. There's very few social enterprises, let alone startups. So we try to be visible in our city for other businesses, for other social enterprises, and participate in the startup community here, and try to raise awareness that way. But as of right now, we're so early, and we're still trying to figure our own organization model out, that we haven't really done enough in that way.
Well, thank you. I love the question. I love the answer. It's wonderful that you're not only making a difference in the lives of these rural farmers, but you're also sort of leveraging that, following the ripples of that further on into the business world. Zhao, it's good to see you back. I don't know. You haven't been. Have you? I guess you haven't been listening to the questions that others have asked Neil. If you'd like to ask him a question about his business, his right livelihood, you can have a shot at it. And if it's already been asked, we'll tell you. How about that?
Okay. Thank you. I think I have some issue with the internet at Banyan Grove earlier.
Oh.
So I'm using my phone instead right now. So my question is, I want to ask Neil, is there any change in you when you first started, when you first went back to India compared to now? What's shifted inside of you after all these years?
Beautiful question. We've been talking about changing the world, and you're asking about changing yourself.
Which is where it all starts. It's the key question. Oh man, I mean, I think everything has changed. I mean, I'm a completely different person. And just to clarify, for me, it wasn't going back to India. I am going forward to India. My parents came from India to the US and started a life there. And my brother and I were born and raised there. For me, coming to India is a completely new place. And so I'm a foreigner, and I'm a person in a foreign land, trying to run a business here. So a lot of learning that way. I think that maybe on that note, how I've changed, I think living in a foreign country changes you in really profound ways. I have a deep appreciation for different perspectives, different at so many different levels. I mean, people here live in a way that we just, back in the States, it's like completely different planet. I mean, it's just a different way of thinking, a way of living. at so many different levels. So for me to live here and to just see other people, how they live and how they think, how they see the world, that's really changed me. That's made me more open. That's made me more patient. That's made me more. It helped me become a better listener. So I think that's been one huge shift. I think so. I just returned from a meditation retreat just 3-4 days ago, and I think one thing that I feel reflecting out of the retreat that I've developed over time is, I would just say, a maturity in I guess I would just call it patience. I don't really know how else to say it, but being able to, I mean, when you're responsible for a company, there's so many different things coming at you, and plus there's so many, you're on all the time, meaning people are looking to you for decisions or for how to deal with a particular problem all the time. And it takes a great deal. I've faced that, a challenge with that over the time, trying to remain balanced and do the right thing, make the right decision time and time again. And that's required me to be really patient and to let things develop a little bit more than sort of push the issue, listen more. I think, like, for example, in this retreat that we had, or this meeting that we had yesterday, there's a tendency for people, when we're having a group discussion, you want to be the person to talk. You want to be the person to be heard. I've really learned to be the last person to speak, recognizing that as the leader of the organization, anything that I say influences everyone else in a different way. So you have to be the last person. This kind of goes to this idea of laddership, and let people be heard. So I don't know. I'm just speaking just random stuff, but those are things that come to mind. I think patience for sure is something that comes to mind.
Great. Thank you for that question, Zhao. We needed you to come in and ask that question.